Hi guys, welcome to episode 3 of the Top 2 podcast. I'm your host Luke, this is my co-host Matt. Matt, say hello.
How's it going, right?
Well, this week we're going to be looking back at last week's first round of championship fixtures and a preview of our week 2 predictions. First game of the weekend, Birmingham Huddersfield. Matt, what did you think of Birmingham last weekend and how do you think they'll do this week?
So I think Birmingham actually got a good result against Luton. I thought they were going to really struggle against Luton. I thought Luton were going to come out easy winners. So to come away with a 0-0 draw was a really, really good result for them. And John Ruddy seems like a really smart signing for them.
Yeah, I think he kept Luton at bay. They had a few chances through Cornick and Morris. We'll get onto them a bit later. Obviously, they're up against Huddersfield, who slipped a defeat in their first game, 1-0 to Burnley. Huddersfield were very poor for the first 60, 70 minutes for me. They couldn't keep possession. They couldn't really have many attacking patterns of play. They sort of kept into their own half. I thought Josh Koroma had a really poor game. He was non-existent for them. And we were talking about him in the first podcast, how he needs to step up this season. One positive for Huddersfield, I felt, was that Tino Anahurin from Chelsea, their loan signing, he came on and put himself about really physical. I thought he had a good cameo. But other than that, it was quite poor from Huddersfield, I thought, against Burnley.
Yeah, I fully agree. I don't think Huddersfield might have a season of struggle after that performance last week. I know Burnley have just come down from the Premier League, so they were expected to be favourites in that game. But the fact that Burnley have had to quickly switch their whole style of play to what is now a more possessive game anyway. But the fact that they were so poor and let Burnley play their way didn't make it difficult. Didn't show any signs of a press. It seems like it's going to be a worrying time for Huddersfield this season.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, we'll talk more about Burnley later on in the show. But I think it was a case of Huddersfield making Burnley look good. They sort of stayed off them. The fact that Huddersfield couldn't really get out, couldn't sustain possession, just kept inviting pressure and pressure from Burnley. So what are your thoughts of this game then? Personally, I think it's going to be a really tight affair. Huddersfield have only got 3 wins in the last 11 against Burnley. Both teams failed to score in their first game. What's your thoughts?
So I've actually gone Birmingham to snatch a narrow 1-0 win, be similar to how Burnley did. Might take a bit of brilliance, might take a set piece. Because I think Huddersfield are probably quite defensively organised, and they'll show that again against Birmingham. But equally, Birmingham will show the same thing. So I think it's going to be a bit of a cagey affair, and I think Birmingham are going to narrowly come out with a 1-0 win.
Yeah, I've gone for 0-0. I agree. I agree with your analysis though, 100%. I think it's going to be cagey. Both teams are quite defensively organised. That was something about Birmingham that we haven't really touched on. They were really well organised against Luton. They didn't give away many clear-cut opportunities. I think 0-0 this game, and I think Huddersfield will be happy with a point and get off the board for the season. So on to the second game now. Obviously, we've got Norwich and Wigan, who are the early kick-off on Saturday. Matt, what's your thoughts on Norwich?
So, well, I watched the game between Cardiff and Norwich, and Norwich showed some really good passages of play, made some really good advances with the ball, but they fell into the trap of playing into Cardiff's way. Cardiff are a little bit of a scrappy team. They like a bit of a fight. They like a bit of a brawl, and Norwich played into their hands perfectly, and Cardiff just soaked it all up. Ended up and Cardiff, I'm gonna say, did really well, but more onto that a little bit later. But Norwich. They really should have done better. Todd Cantwell was unlucky to hit the post with that effort that he had, but they didn't really get into the box enough. It didn't really test the keeper enough. It was very much quite a lot of long range efforts and should have done better for me in this game.
Yeah, obviously Todd Cantwell was a player we spoke about last podcast, saying that his career sort of stalled for the last 2 years. But having watched the quite extensive highlights of the Cardiff Norwich game, he seemed to be at the heart of everything in that sort of number 10 coming off the left role, sort of similar to how Grealish played the year. Villa got promoted, and obviously we mentioned that there used to be comparisons between the two, and obviously I've just touched on it there. What did you think of the Grant Hanley red card? I thought his first booking was extremely harsh. It appeared that it was actually his partner at centre-back, Andrew Omobamidele, that shoved the Cardiff player to the ground, and Hanley was the one that received the booking. And then his second, I don't think anyone disputes his second booking, but I personally think that was a harsh decision. What do you think?
Well, the second booking was definitely well deserved, but the first one, it's one of those cases where was he booked for what actually happened in the situation? Was he booked for a reaction? That it's all, you never know what goes on actually on the pitch in that moment. Whether something said to the referee, we could never know. But the fact that he did receive that first yellow card, he should have been a lot more smarter in a way that he shouldn't be diving into challenges when he's already on that yellow card. The fact that Cardiff themselves were down to 10 men, and then he made that silly mistake to then go in and make a challenge. I thought it was a silly situation to make for that second yellow card.
Yeah, I agree. The second yellow, especially in the area it's in, it's halfway into the half. You know, it's not near the edge of the box. Norwich already a goal down. The last thing they needed to be is a man down. I fully agree. But I thought the first booking was harsh, and which for me makes the overall red card harsh. Onto their opponents today, Wigan. Obviously, they drew 0-0 with Preston last time out. There wasn't much quality in that game against Preston. Wigan only had one or two good chances that were saved by Preston goalkeeper Freddie Woodman. Ben Amos was the standout for me. He made some really key saves off Emil Rees-Jacobsen to get Wigan the point. And unfortunately, Wigan couldn't even capitalise on Preston going down to 10 men. So I think my takeaway from that game is that Wigan really need to up their attacking play if they're to score the goals to stay in this league, which was why I had them near the bottom in my predictions. So what were your thoughts on Wigan?
Well, also, we've got to think that it was a derby of the first game of the season. Wigan and Preston being very close together. And I think it was a bit feisty. There were definitely chances on both ends, especially more so Wigan. I thought Wigan had a couple of good chances. But the fact that they couldn't, as you said, they couldn't capitalise on Preston going down to 10 men. And Preston, I think, would probably be down around about there anyway. I don't think they'll be in the bottom three, but I think they'll be down around bottom half.
Yeah, I think they'll be near the middle personally. So what's your prediction for this game?
So I've gone a comfortable 3-1 Norwich win.
I've gone 2-0 for Norwich. An interesting little stat as well. Wigan have only won 3 times against Norwich in their whole history, and that they start their first game against each other was in 1987. So that spreads across about 40 years of playing each other. And Wigan have only won 3 times, and I don't fancy them to get another win this time out. Should we move on to the next game, Bristol City Sunderland? Matt, what was your thoughts on the Sunderland game this weekend?
So I thought Sunderland were quite organised. They did well to get their lead early on in that game, but they didn't really show too much signs of quality going forward after that goal. And I think they're gonna do okay this season. It was a good result against a Coventry side who I expect to do quite well, but I think there's still room for improvement in their side.
Yeah, I thought they were quite organised. I didn't give many quality opportunities away, whether that was because of how well drilled Sunderland were or whether how poor Coventry were going forward. Obviously, we'll speak more about Coventry. Obviously, I touched on, we actually had a really good record in the last episode of speaking about players that happened to perform really well this game week. One of the players I said was key for Sunderland was Jack Clarke. Obviously, he got the very fortuitous goal off some poor goalkeeping from Coventry. But, you know, I think if they're to stay up, he's going to be a main creative outlet. He's going to be dribbling at defenders, you know, and they do need him to contribute with some goals. It can't all be left up to Ross Stewart. You know, Embleton, Roberts and Clark all need to contribute as well. But yeah, I think Sunderland was solid, and I think they'll be hard to beat in any game. I think they'll give most championship sides a good game. And one thing I do want to touch on is that home atmosphere at the Stadium of Light. I think nearly 40,000 fans were there. That's amazing, especially in the championship. So I think if they can turn the Stadium of Light into a fortress, I think Sunderland will be more than fine. However, Bristol City, I think actually were probably the most hard done by team in the first game week. Obviously, they lost 2-1 to Hull. Both Hull goals were very fortuitous. Obviously, massive deflection on the first one off Seri, and then obviously the penalty was an absolutely farcical decision. Nigel Pearson said he didn't want to speak on it because he didn't want to get fined on the first game week. Obviously, we don't have to worry about that. Absolutely awful refereeing. The games I watched, I thought the refereeing this weekend was actually really good. But that game, that decision for the penalty was awful. It was almost like slow motion. There was almost contact, but there wasn't. Then he moved, then he went down again. Sort of went down in stages, and there was never a contact there in the first place. And for the ref to buy it, I think that was really poor. So I think Bristol City were really hard done by. Again, a player we mentioned on how important he is for Bristol City, Andy Vyman, scored first game week, lovely finish at the back post. Coming off a season last year where he got double-digit goals, double-digit assists, and I think they'll be relying on him to score the goals for them again. One player that I was actually quite impressed with for Bristol City was debutant Mark Sykes. I mentioned him coming up from Oxford, and him and Brannigan for Oxford were a really good partnership, but whether he could sustain that in the Championship, he was everywhere. He was an engine. He was leading the play forward, but always in position defensively. Really technically sound. He's going to be a player that's going to be really important in that midfield for Bristol City this season. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought Andy Weidman's goal was really, really well worked goal from Bristol City in general, and it's a shame, really, the way that Hull City got back into the game and the lucky deflection they had in that game. I thought it was little bit unlucky for Bristol, and I thought they played some good stuff, but uh, they also did concede a fair few chances to Hull as well, barring those two mistakes. I mean, so I think it was an okay game. They were unlucky not to get anything from it, but I think overall, I still think Bristol City should have done better in that game, and it's probably the first game syndrome sort of thing. And I think they will improve as the season goes on.
Yeah. So, what's your prediction in this game?
So I've actually gone for a Sunderland 2-0 win just because of how organised it were, and I think they could get a good result here.
I've actually gone the other way. I've gone 2-1 Bristol City. I think maybe feeling aggrieved from the first game, they'll want to bounce back. Nigel Pearson will fire them up a bit more. And I think Sunderland will lose that edge of being at home, having the crowd with them. First away game, being back in the Championship. So I've just gone Bristol City, but I do think it'll be a tight game. On to one of the more interesting games of the Championship weekend is Burnley versus Luton, two sides who I think will certainly be up the top and come the end of the season. Matt, what was your thoughts on Luton last time out?
So as you just said, I think this is a very exciting game, and I think this is a game that could go either way in terms of how the flow of the game will go, how possession will go. And Luton really coming off the back of a game that they should have won against Birmingham, in my opinion. With some of the players that they've brought in, the quality of players, Colton Morris, and is it Corley Woodrow? Is that yeah, and I thought it's going to take a while for them to get to gel and get used to each other and get used to how each other play. But I still think against that Birmingham side, they should have found the back of the nest at least once in that game, just with the quality that they've got.
Yeah, and some of the chances they had, as we said earlier, John Ruddy had a fantastic game. But you'd like to think with all the attacking talents at Luton, Adebayo had a quiet game, Woodrow, Morris, they didn't quite create massive clear-cut chances. And I think that's because obviously they've just signed Woodrow and Morris. They haven't played under Collins before. I do think it'll take them a couple of games just to find the feet. And I think it'll take time for this side to gel. But I think once they've gelled, I think they'll soon be up there quite quickly. Whereas Burnley, I was really surprised by how they performed. They were probably the surprise team of the weekend for me. To go from a Sean Dyche rigid 4-4-2 long ball team to this fast moving, I'd probably say it was a 4-2-3-1 at times, sometimes 4-4-2. Really fluid attacking team, passing and moving, crisp, everything forward, but not launching balls in behind all the time. There was a few to Barnes, don't get me wrong, but it was mainly through that midfield two of Brownhill and Josh Cullen, who I sang the praise of him last podcast, Josh Cullen, and I was surprised he dropped into the Championship. He was phenomenal. Everything he did was positive on the ball. He looked like he had that extra second on the ball that quality midfielders always do. He was an engine. He was absolutely everywhere, intercepting the ball. He was driving from deep. He was spreading the play. He was brilliant. And I also was really impressed with left back Davidson, Ian Matson, who scored the goal for them. Considering he was playing in a back four, he was almost a wing. He was basically a wing back all game. Obviously, he was in the box to score the goal. I think Ashley Barnes had a good game. He got straight offside a few times in the first half, but he was always getting in behind, always creating chances. And if he was a bit more clinical, Burnley, and the same as David Dava Costello, if those two were more clinical, Burnley could have been 3 or 4 up at half time.
Yeah. And I think that's going to be a bit of a curse of Burnley as the season goes on. And this is something I question about their prolificness in their team, because the fact that the goal came from Ian Mason, which I've got to say was a fantastic finish anyway, but it was a little bit fortuitous the way that the ball deflected to him off the back heel of Barnes. I don't think he meant the assist. And that worries me, the fact that that's where the goal came from. And whilst you said they should be up 3 or 4 up at half time, there's so many teams last season we said they could have done exactly the same thing over many games, and they ended up being lower than what they ended up being. And so they've really got to try and turn those good players those good passive plays into goals rather than just chances.
Yeah,
out of his division is by scoring goals at the end of the day. And
yeah, I think you've got to remember as well, though, they've obviously got Jay Rodriguez to come back. The last season he had in this division, he scored like 23, 24 at West Bromwich Albion. Obviously, Scott Twine, who came on and hit the post off a free kick, he'll be starting, I presume, once he's fully integrated. Because I was a little disappointed with Samuel Bastian from Burnley, the signing from Standard Liège. I thought sometimes he was a bit off the ball and he was a bit poor in possession, kept giving it away a lot. So I think I could easily see Twine coming in for him. But yeah, once you add Twine and Rodriguez, I think there's two more people that can score the goals rather than just Barnes and defenders. But I think Burnley are going to be one of those sides that keep improving. Obviously, this is their first competitive game under the company. For a lot of these players, it's the first time even playing this way. Like, a lot of them have been Sean Dyche signings for years, and so this would be completely new to them. So I was really impressed at how quickly they seemed to take to it. I do think they're tied at about 70 minutes. So maybe fitness could be an issue there, and squad depth and using the subs more. But I think it was really positive for Burnley on the opening weekend. And I've carried that on into this game. I think that Burnley will win 2-1. What do you think, Matt?
So I think because Luton is going to be a much more trickier opponent than Huddersfield, I have to think Luton might edge this 1-2-1.
Interesting. Do you want to move on to Preston versus Hull now?
Yeah, excellent. So Preston, I thought they defended well against Wigan. They have made some good passages of play, but it was really got to speak about that red card. It was a really poor sending off, and players should never be diving into challenges like that,
especially on the halfway line.
Yeah,
there's no net game for that. Really, it's silly. We see it all the time. It's poor decision making. He's only been on the pitch 8 minutes as well. I think that's really let his manager down there, and I think Preston did well to maintain a point. I was really impressed with Jakobsen, again, another player that I spoke of. He obviously hit the bar, had a couple of good chances saved by Ben Amos, and I think he's absolutely pivotal to Preston scoring goals, whether he's creating the chances or scoring them himself. I do think they need to get some support in for him because, Preston, they didn't really get much going offensively against Wigan. Wigan had more shots and Wigan had 20 shots, 5 on target. Preston had less. Obviously, the red card will have affected that, so I am reserving my judgment on their attack. But I do think Preston need 1 or 2 more in that area for them to potentially break into the top half. But yeah, Hull, on the other hand, extremely, extremely fortunate in my opinion. Sevi's goal, massive deflection outside of the box. And then we've already spoke on the penalty. Absolutely shambolic decision. Good penalty by Tufan, who for me had a good game. I mentioned that his quality didn't really show through at Watford because he was never really fit, never really got a run of games. But I think under Shota, in this with the Turkish chairman and all the Turkish league signings, I really think he could be given a platform to flourish again, like he did a couple of seasons ago at Fenerbahce when he had a double assist season, which I think is really good for an attacking midfielder. And I think he's going to be the main man behind all the attacking players that Hull have signed: Tete, Estupinan, Alia. I think Tufan's the key for them personally. So what do you think about Hull?
Well, firstly, I want to talk about that penalty decision last week. I think it's an absolute horrendous decision from the referee. But I also want to make a comment on the Bristol City centre half. I'm not sure who committed the foul, but the foul that was committed, the players in this division know not to go down on the floor in the box. As soon as you do that, you give the referee an option. And I'm not defending the referee because it's a poor decision from the referee, but it's about being a little bit smarter in the box, staying on your feet and trying to make the challenge on your feet. But and also Hull were extremely fortunate with both the goals that they conceded last week, and really Bristol City should have defended better, in my opinion, in that game.
Yeah, I agree. So for this game, I've gone 1-1 again. I think be a tight, cagey affair. I think not many goals will be on show, so I reckon just 1-1 personally.
I've gone 1-0 Hull.
Interesting. On to another interesting game this weekend, QPR Borough. I'll start with Borough. I watched all the game against West Brom. First half, that I thought they were phenomenal. Ryan Giles was a player that I praised as a really good signing. He was phenomenal. His delivery was excellent from wing back. The amount of dangerous crosses he put in, obviously, he helped create the goal for his fellow fullback Isaiah Jones. Is another player I think is phenomenal. Pacey, direct, takes his man on, energetic, gets back into position to defend though. I thought the 2 fullbacks from Middlesbrough were sensational the first 45, but second half they didn't really appear to get going. I will say I do think they should have had the game buried against West Brom in the first half. Duncan Watmore should have buried that chance for me at 1-0 to make it 2-0. I don't think West Brom would have come back from that. But leaving the game at 1-0 always allows your opponent to get that one goal and get back into the game. And I think that's what happened. I think both teams each half didn't recover after the other scored. So I think when Middlesbrough scored, they just dominated for the rest of that half against West Brom. Then when West Brom scored, I think they dominated against Middlesbrough. So I think on the balance of the game, a point was fair. And I think both sides will be up there. They both showed probably more quality than a lot of the other games that have been, and obviously it was only the first game, so don't read into anything too much. But I think both sides will be up there. Middlesbrough defended really well, especially first half. I was really impressed with them, especially considering they had Bowler and Dyke still on the outskirts of that back three, who are both normally full-backs. I thought they were both really athletic, really good in the tackle, protecting Lenihan, who I thought had a really good debut, really old-fashioned centre-half performance, leader's performance from him. They clearly need strikers. Obviously, they bought Marcus Force on. He caused a little bit of problems, but not too many. He only had a small cameo. I really think if Middlesbrough can invest in one or two strikers, I really think that'll be fine. I think McGree had a nice game. He was linking the play really well, playing the balls out to the full-backs for them to whip the crosses in. I just think they need to stick one or two people on the end of them. And I think those strikers will want to go to Middlesbrough because, to me, I think there's a team there that can have two strikers to get 20 goals a season with the amount of service there. Yeah. But yeah, what were your thoughts?
So I want to make a comment about actually Johnny Howson. Johnny Howson in the first half had a brilliant game, was spraying balls left and right to the fullbacks, and then it seemed like in the second half they put West Brom put a man on Johnny Howson, and it stopped that supply to the wing backs, and I think that was one reason why Borough struggled to actually put a foothold on the game in that second half. But then I'm going to quickly just flip it over on going on to QPR, and I thought QPR. That game really against Blackburn, they were poor. Kakai was the closest that they came in that game, but overall, 0 shots on target is a really, really poor stat. And on top of that, they had no corners. So they from what those stats say, they had a very, very little effect on the game. And even though it took a brilliant goal from Travers in that game to break the deadlock, QPR really have to have more about them going forward.
Yeah, I think they really missed Chris Willock. He was a main creative influence for them. Had a really good season. He was another player that got double-digit assists. I want to just mention Lyndon Dykes. I think he's a really good player, I do, but I think he does have he always seems to have a poor run of games or not influence games. And I think in losing Charlie Austin and Gray, they haven't even got someone that can bring on for him when he's having one of his poorer games. And I think that's an issue that QPR really need to address. I know they've got a player called Charlie Kalman. I don't know much about him. I know he was there last year and he didn't play much, so that implies to me that he's more inferior than Austin and Gray, who are rotating with Dykes. I think they definitely need to sign an alternate for Dykes and maybe one or two more creative players because going forward they were non-existent. It was only a matter of time before Blackburn scored. Ben Berrington Diaz had a lot of chances as well. It had one ruled out for offside. But yeah, I think QPR were really, really poor. But I've gone 1-0 Middlesbrough in this game.
I've also got 1-0 Middlesbrough in this game.
Yeah. On to Reading Cardiff. Matt, do you want to talk about Cardiff? Because I know you watched that game.
Yeah, so I thought both Sawyers was brilliant in that game. He was instrumental with the passes he was making. He was being very progressive with his passing. And it was nice to see him in a more advanced role again, like he used to play at Brentford and what he played at times at Stoke before he got injured. And Kipre as well for the goal did brilliant about like picking up that ball from defence and bringing it into midfield, and that the finish from Sawyers was brilliant as well. It was a very, very neat pass into the bottom corner almost. It didn't even look like a shot. It literally just curled it into the bottom corner. It was a really, really nice tidy finish, and it was a brilliant result for Cardiff to start against relegated Norwich, who I expect Norwich to be up there as well. So it was brilliant overall performance from Cardiff.
Yeah, especially going down to 10 men first. Obviously, Ng got sent off. No qualms from my end of that. I think it was rightly so.
Yes.
Obviously, he was also involved in all the fracas that got Hanley but the first time. But the fact that even in I think it was a 12-minute spell between Norwich having 11 and Cardiff having 10, Norwich didn't really create much. No. Pookie was non-existent. Yeah. Rashika had a really poor game for me. He was non-existent. You know, he was a player that I really liked when he was at Werder Bremen. I think he had one season where he scored like 9-10 goals in the Bundesliga. But he's not really doing it so far in England. And I do worry about him in the Championship. But yeah, I think Norwich really need to improve their attacking play.
Yeah.
If they're going to score the goals to get them in the top six, they need to get service into Pukki. He's very much a striker that relies on that through ball. But yeah, I think Norwich will be quite disappointed with that, but Cardiff will be really pleased. We spoke about Kipre saying we were surprised that West Brom let him go, that he was really good with the ball at his feet, but it was actually his defensive qualities that shone in that game for me.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
He sort of moved into sort of a flexible centre-back, right-back slot when they went down to 10 as well, which I thought was really good. And obviously his passing out from the back was excellent. On to their opponents, Reading. Obviously they lost 1-0 to Blackpool in a really poor showing, in my opinion. They only had 3 shots on target, 2 of which were outside the box. They're really missing Lucas Zhao up front. You know, they had Yaku Maite. But if you look at the names they've got attacking-wise, they had Ince, Ajaria, Hoyle and Yaku Maite. You thought that between them, they would have still caused more problems. Jeff Hendrick just behind them. But they're really toothless up front. I do really worry for them this year. I do think this could be the year they drop down. I think Paul Ince isn't a good manager, as I said on the previous podcast. So I really do worry for Reading this year. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it was a really poor result from Reading to start with. It was probably one of the games that they actually had a chance of getting a better result with against Blackpool. And the one thing that really questioned me is it took Reading till the 83rd minute to change anything, even when they was losing for such a good portion of the game. And I thought that was a bad example. A good example, should I say, of poor management from Paul Ince. Really, when you're at the game, when you got like Shane Long on the bench, who might not have the fitness of his level, but he still knows where the back of the net is. Surely you've got to take a gamble and bring him on sooner than the 83rd minute for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think that shows poor in-game management from Paul Ince. Interestingly enough, Reading only have 1 defeat in their last 13 versus Cardiff, albeit it was the last time they played each other and Reading were at home like they are again. Regardless of that, though, I'm having Cardiff to win 1-0. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I've got Cardiff to win 2-0 because they was very impressive, both defensively and the chance that they made going forward. And I think there'll be a little bit too much for Reading in this game.
Yeah, me too. One thing I will say on Cardiff, really good performance. I thought O'Dowda looked really good as well. Player that we didn't really mention, like taking on his man, playing nice crosses into the box. I do think they need to sign a striker. I think once they do that, they'll be fine. Right, then we'll move on to the next game, Sheffield United Millwall. Matt, do you want to tell us about Millwall?
Well, yeah, so I was really impressed with how Millwall organised that game. They was very good from their set pieces. I thought Charlie Creswell was a really good player, made some really good runs in the box from the set pieces. George Honeyman as well, brilliant from the delivery. And there were 2 players that we highlighted last week as being really good signings for Millwall, and it proved in the first game.
Yeah, we talked about whether they'd be able to replicate Jed Wallace's set piece delivery, and I thought Malone and Honeyman were excellent. I think Creswell could have had a hat trick. Obviously, he had the one that he put just over a bar, and then obviously the really good save off Bursic, plus the 2 that he actually scored. I was really surprised at how much they actually got at Stoke in the end, obviously mainly from set pieces, but obviously they've got Zion Fleming to come into that attack still. I thought Millwall looked really good. They didn't really give many chances away as well. They looked really rigid, and it's actually made me rethink my top 6 predictions a bit because I was that impressed by Millwall. I thought Sheffield United were poor. They had a makeshift defence. Obviously, O'Connell might not even ever play again. The new signing, Amadozic, he had a 1-game ban that Paul Heckingbottom didn't even know about, which I thought was really poor from the club in general, just to not know that they had a player suspended. I thought Kieran Clark had a really poor debut. Obviously, against the best, like for me, the best attack in the league, Sarr, Dennis and Pedro. But Clark got booked and then was subbed off after about 68 minutes, I believe. He was run ragged. And for me, Paul Heckingbottom got the decision wrong. You mentioned last week that he was a good manager. I'm still not sure on him. He started with Daniel Jefferson over Ryan Brewster and Billy Sharp. And he also played Sander Berge in a 10 role and Norwood behind. And personally, I think those 2 are much better the other way. I think Sander Berge is a phenomenal player and you want to get him involved in the game as much as possible. So for me, having him as a number 10 is in his most effective position for me. For me, he's an all-round 8 because he's got an absolute fantastic engine. He's strong, he can tackle, as well as also doing all the forward-thinking things. Whereas I think Norwood isn't as good defensively in the 8. So I'm surprised those 2 played that way around for me. Illiman and Jay, I thought, had a decent game. I think if you can partner a good striker with him just behind, I think he'll be fantastic. But Sheffield United just looked really toothless to me in this game, and Watford were never really troubled much. What did you think?
Yeah, I agree. I did watch the game and I thought I thought the game overall lacked a little bit of quality overall, and it was a very poor game to watch. And Sheffield United going forward, I thought they had nothing to go about them, and I agree with you about. I know last week I said Paul Heckingbottom was a good manager, but after watching the game, just the whole way that they played, and it seemed like the players didn't know what to do, and they was in the wrong positions, and they had no way of progressing forward on the ball, and I thought they really, really struggled in that game.
Yeah, I did, and I'll be honest, I've had Millwall to win this one 2-1. I think that struggle. I think Sheffield United have struggled to defend Millwall set pieces again, just like Stoke did.
I've got this down as a 1-1 draw.
Nice. Right, well, because we're about halfway through and we've still got quite a few games to go, let's move on to Stoke and Blackpool. Matt, what did you think about Blackpool?
So I thought Blackpool had a really good game against Reading. That Connolly goal was a really, really good finish, and it was a good start by for Mark Clapton's second managerial spell at Blackpool. And he's really deserved that opportunity to manage in the Championship. He's waited very patiently for his opportunity. I think he took it really well in the first game. Really, Reading probably not the most difficult sides to beat in this division. They do have players going forward well, but Reading I expect to really, really struggle. So, and the fact that the Blackpool they got the result. They did what they wanted to do, and they did it really well. And that's all you can commend them on.
Yeah, I thought Josh Bowler had a really good game, had a couple of chances himself. Obviously, it was his rebounded shot that was for the goal. He was a player that I mentioned that last year, I think got about 7-8 goals in this league and about the same assists. I think he's really key for Blackpool. Obviously, their opponent, Stoke. We've just mentioned Millwall beating them 2-0. Stoke really couldn't handle the set pieces. For me, although they've signed Aidan Flint back there, they really miss Harry Souttar at the back there. His height alone, 6'6", he'd have helped deal with those. I thought Bursic had a really good game, helped keep the score down, made some really good saves off Cresswell. But yeah, Gale looked massively off the pace. I was surprised he started, and I just think, and they were also missing Nick Powell, and I think that Michael O'Neill is under a lot of pressure. You know, the setup against the set pieces, the fact that they're playing Millwall, who's one of the best at set pieces in the division, and they had no idea on how to combat that. There was at least 4 or 5 Millwall could have scored off. The substitutions didn't really change the game. Starting Gale when he's not really played in pre-season, he hasn't really played a lot for the last two seasons, and leaving last season's top scorer Brown on the bench, I just don't get it. And I personally think Michael O'Neill will be the first manager to go. But in this game, I've actually had them to win 2-1. Matt, what are your thoughts?
I do agree with you. It was very poor from Michael O'Neill, and the defending from set pieces at times it was laughable. For the second goal for Charlie Cresswell, where they let him come across 2 Stoke bodies to get not a strike with his head, but a strike with his foot in the centre of goal on goal, is absolute woeful defending at this level, at any level really from in the top 4 divisions, and really is unacceptable defending. But like you, I've actually got Stoke to win. I've got Stoke to win 2-0 here.
Nice. On to Swansea Blackburn. I thought Swansea were really good against Rotherham. Very unlucky not to win. They had 74% possession. You know, that's when Russell Martin likes to play, passing out from the back, keeping possession, recycling the ball, fast pace. You know, I really liked Swansea this year. I had them in my playoffs. And while I'm still a little bit unsure whether they'll get there, I think it was a really good show and unlucky not to win. What a goal by Harry Darling, by the way. I spoke about him on the last podcast. You know, he's from MK Dons. Martin had him before. He's amazing at playing out from the back. But for me, to hit a ball like that is phenomenal. Last season, I mentioned he got 10 goals. I think he'll get at least 5 this season. Technically, he's really good. He reminds me of a young Harry Maguire when I used to watch him at Sheffield United or Hull. The way he can bring stride out with the ball. And then obviously his technical ability when striking or passing the ball for me is phenomenal. Obafemi, that chance he missed though.
Yeah.
What was he thinking? And that's the fine margin. That would have won them the game.
Yeah.
You know, I thought Joel Pirro had a quiet game. He was a player that I really bigged up last podcast. But he didn't really affect the game much. I think he only had something like 19, 20 touches the ball. You know, that's not a lot. But, you know, I thought Swansea would still take a lot of positives from that performance. What were your thoughts on Swansea and subsequently on Blackburn?
So I talked just about Blackpool, about how they expected to beat Reading. I expected Reading to be down towards the bottom of the table, and Blackpool did the job. Swansea didn't do the job that they expected to do. They really should have beat Rotherham, and especially with the chances that they had, they should have beat Rotherham. They had the majority of the ball, but the one thing I do want to comment on is the chances Rotherham had. that Rotherham had 9 shots on. Swansea conceded 9 shots, and 8 of those were on target. So, thanks to a very good goalkeeping performance by the Swansea keeper, the Swansea could have been in a lot worse a position if it wasn't for their goalkeeper. And as you said, they should have been more clinical. Blackburn, on the other hand, Blackburn had a brilliant game against QPR and absolutely dominated. What a goal again by Travis. And it's going to be interesting to see how this game opens up and how it pans out.
Yeah, Lewis Travis, about 2 years ago, before he had a really bad injury, was a player that I certainly touted to be moving to a Premier League club. A couple of years on, his team's gotten more mature and his plays, obviously the captain now, energetic, technically really good as well. Obviously, that goal is a phenomenal goal. We were really blessed this first weekend. We had Victor Gyökeres's goal, Harry Darling's goal, Sawyer's goal, and now Travis's goal. I think this is going to be a really good game on the eye. Ben Brereton Diaz is still there. He had a lot of chances against QPR. He had 2 saves, 1 ruled out for offside, and a decent miss as well. Keeping him for me is the biggest bit of business Blackburn can do between now and the end of the window. I think this is going to be a goals galore game, personally. I think this is going to be 3-2 Swansea.
See, I've got the opposite. I think it's going to be a bit of a ball game, and I think it's going to be 1-0 Blackburn. Interesting.
On to the penultimate game now, Coventry-Rotherham. We were just touching about Swansea there. I thought a player that I forgot to mention, not forgot, but didn't have time to mention on the last podcast, Ogbene. Obviously, we talked about Rotherham losing Smith, Ladapo, Ihikwe. I think keeping Ogbene and Barlaser were the 2 best things they could do. Obviously, Ogbene scored the goal. He also had a couple of other chances. And I mentioned that Washington and Eves probably won't score enough goals. They're really going to be relying on Ogbene to really step up this season, try and hit double digits for them. And if he does, they might have a chance of staying up. I was really impressed with the energetic Ben Wiles in midfield. I thought Barlaser helped organise their possession. I do think, obviously, they created some good opportunities, but obviously giving Swansea 74% possession, that sort of showed that Rotherham had to sort of keep in shape, be patient, do a lot of hard work off the ball, which I think they're going to have to do in a lot of games if they want to stay up. So I think that was quite a positive result and a positive performance for Rotherham. I still think they need a bit more quality, especially going forward if they're going to stay up. But yeah, I think that was quite positive. So what did you think of Rotherham and what do you think of Coventry?
See, I think Rotherham managed the game very well. They limited Swansea to very, very few chances. Besides the Obafemi chance, which, as we spoke, he really, really should have put that away. Rotherham did really well, managed the game well. And despite letting Swansea have a lot of the ball, Swansea didn't create an awful too much clear-cut chances. And I think it was a very, very good performance for them. But now they're going away to Coventry, which is always a hard place to go away to. And Coventry coming back off themselves having a good away result at the Stadium of Light. And that was Mark Robbins' 300th game impressively through Coventry. So now he's going to do his 301st, and he's got ever so much experience at Coventry. And I think he's going to have a really, really good season again with Coventry, like they did last season. And for me, that Gyökeres goal, absolutely phenomenal goal, out the top draw. The way that he brought it out from midfield and shifted it onto his right foot, brilliant finish. And it seems like it's been a weekend of some really, really good goals in the Championship, and it's glad for it to be back. And what do you think about the Coventry game?
Obviously, I bigged up Gyökeres a lot on the last podcast, and that goal is why he's one of the few players in this Championship that can produce that little bit of magic, that amazing finish out of nothing, that little bit of play to bring someone else into the game. And I'm really a big fan of him. I think they really missed O'Hare creatively. Like you said, there wasn't much quality in the game, like quality chances from either side. But I think Coventry really missed the energy and the fine passing of O'Hare. I don't think Godden and Gyökeres had much to work with all game. I was really impressed with Jonathan Panzo. He was a player that I knew about years ago before I know he went abroad. He went to, I think it was Monaco, and then he went to Belgium League, and now he's ended up at Coventry. Left-footed, really, really comfortable on the ball, like a really technically gifted centre-back, and obviously he got the assist for the goal, but I was really impressed with his all-round game. But like Luton, I think Coventry are just a stable club. They've had a manager that knows them really well. Yeah. I do think they'll get better as the season goes on. I do think they'll be up the top end of the table. But I just do worry about that. They sometimes do have these games where they struggle to score. And I think that could be what holds them back. But in this game, I've had them to win 2-1.
I've also got them to win 2-1 in this game. So I think it'll be an interesting Interesting game.
I think that's only the second time we've agreed.
I think so, yeah.
On to the last game of the weekend, and for me, the biggest game, West Brom Watford. I'll start with Watford. As you said, we watched that game. The front three of Watford is the best in the league by a clear distance for me. Like Blackburn with keeping Diaz, I think if Watford managed to keep Sarr and Dennis, or even just one of them to play with Pedro, who I thought put in a sheer perfect complete performance of a striker. His hold-up play, his work rate, his touch. He scored. His movement, his pace. I think this João Pedro will go to the top in his career. I'm talking about Europa League, Champions League. I think he's got the talent to get there. I think he's only 22. I think he's got that much of a high ceiling. He'll get 20 goals this year for me easily, especially if Sarr and Dennis are there. I think overall Watford lack quality. I was really disappointed in their midfield, and I think that could be what holds them back this year. I think cleverly, despite being a good servant to the club, a lower rated English midfielder, sort of sometimes underrated, sometimes overrated. I think he isn't the ability to lead a side to the top six. I thought Kayambe next to him was really energetic, but quite poor on the ball. And then obviously they played the back five, and the wing backs didn't do too much for me. It was all about the front three. And I think the front three will cause West Brom problems this game. So what do you think?
So I think it's quite convenient to mention this actually. So Watford have come down in from the Premier League, trusted in a new manager, and I actually want to compare it to what West Brom did last year. They came down, they switched to a 5 at the back system, and it seemed like a lot of time last season when West Brom were playing that that most of the games the midfield was passing them by, and I think it's what seems like very similar to what's happening with Watford, and the games they're passing the midfield by, and I think it's going to their front three is probably the best front three in the league, probably by some distance as well.
Yeah, definitely.
If they can keep hold of that, Watford will always be a threat no matter what game they're going to go into. But if they lose them, I think then they could struggle to find the goals to win games this season. But going on to West Brom, the first half display for West Brom in our game against Middlesbrough was one of the worst first half displays I've seen in a long time by a team. But the second half display absolutely changed the game. But they were lucky to go into the break at only being a goal down, and could have been 2-3 and outside, and probably should have been out of sight. But so to show that character to come back and actually get a point from a game, which in hindsight is probably a good point for them. It was really well worked and a really good job by them.
Yeah, I thought it was a poor first half from West Brom. I thought Darnell Furlong had a poor 90 minutes, to be fair. I think Ryan Giles, he's one of the best crosses of the ball, and Furlong just stood off him all game and never trapped his runners. Like the first goal was given away from Furlong, giving the ball away and then not getting back in position, pulled everyone else out, 3 man at the back post, Jones taps it in. Thought he had a really poor game. I thought the midfield were a bit non-existent as well in the first half. Livermore and Malumbi, they put through a lot of running, but they weren't really imposing themselves on the game, keeping the ball, feeding it to those more creative players. And I do think Steve Bruce got it wrong, starting Matt Phillips to offer the defensive side, because he physically couldn't keep up with Isaiah Jones. Not many will in this league. No. And for me, if I was a fan of West Brom, I would have wanted Dean Garner or Carlon Grant to start out there to pin Isaiah Jones back, rather than being the cautious approach, which is the West Brom fans' criticism of Steve Bruce, that he always goes too cautious. And I think Matt Phillips showed that he physically just doesn't have it anymore at this level. So, and going on to the second half, Swift and Wallace much more involved. We spoke about those two potentially being the two signings of the window. And they combined for what was a really well-worked breakaway goal. A player that didn't get much of a mention on the coverage that I thought was fantastic. Semi Ajayi, I thought he was
absolutely.
I've watched Championship football for a while. I saw him in the season that they came up at West Brom. I saw him in the Premier League, and for me, he always looked like, despite his stature and his size, he always looked too timid and standoffish as a centre back. This game, he wasn't. He was in at the feet of the attackers, stepping into play with the ball, spraying some nice passes, really commanding in the air, shut off. There was one time where I forgot who it was from Middlesbrough, played a lovely ball. Pardon?
Was it played through to Akpom? Was it?
It was played through to Akpom, but I can't remember the midfielder. And the pass was inch perfect. And Ajayi's pace and size he just got a toe to it to intercept it. And for me, a criticism of Ajayi has always been that he switched off at the back, especially in a back two. But that game, he was phenomenal. And second half, Dara O'Shea, his body was everywhere, his face, his shoulder, a proper old-fashioned centre half. So I think second half, there was a lot of positives for West Brom to take. However, I think they're in trouble this game. I think the fullbacks are going to get rinsed, especially Furlong. I toyed with going 3-1 Watford, but I think it's just going to be 2-1 Watford.
See, I've actually changed my prediction from when we first spoke, and I've actually think Watford are going to narrowly win this 1-0. And I think it's going to be a tough game for West Brom. If they can get something from this game, it's going to be a brilliant point, but I struggle to see it happening.
I think the way for West Brom to get something out of this game, having watched the Sheffield United game, is to play on the front foot. Watford weren't really tested that much defensively against Sheffield United personally. So for me, there's still a lot of questions there. Like there's still that poor defence that came down from the Premier League. It'd be interesting, if they could get Daryl DK, who I thought had a really good cameo. We haven't really touched on that. Bullied all the centre-halves. Even Lenihan, who I thought had a really good game. He bullied all the centre-halves, created some chances just by himself. There was one chance as well that we haven't touched on where Jed Wallace should have squared it to Carl Grant, and that would have been enough for West Brom to win the game. I think if they can start DK, Dean Garner, Swift, and Wallace, I think they're probably one of either the second or third best attack in this league, so they'll cause Watford problems.
Yeah.
But I think if West Brom are conservative or get caught on the counter attack at the pace that Watford have got, I think Watford will score 2 or 3. Well, I've gone with 2-1. So that's it for this week. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Please check out our other two. Obviously the first week, the Championship preview is a bit outdated now, or check out our Premier League preview. Enjoy the weekend of football. Peace out.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.